Welcome to the Microdosing for Healing podcast. I'm your host, Casey Garrett, and together we'll be discovering and learning from inspiring voices of healers, medicine keepers, and visionaries. Every episode, we'll explore the world of health, vibrant wellness, and natural medicine for a new era of human society. Welcome to today's episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the pod. Today, I'm delighted to introduce you to Julie Freeman. So Julie, we have had Julie grace our community in the past, and everyone was absolutely blown away. So she is truly just a treasure trove of information in regards to vibrant natural health and nutrition specifically, which we're going to dive into today. You know, so many things. We can do all the meditation, all the microdosing, all the things in the world, but until we really tap into the possibilities with our nutrition and our diet, that just makes everything come alive and so much better. So I'm super excited to dive into this conversation today with Jewel. So let me share a little bit about her background. She is a licensed integrative nutritionist with graduate education in psychology, counseling, and education. Postgraduate certifications include functional medicine, Reiki, yoga, and mind-body medicine. She has over 40 years experience in the field of nutrition. You'll see, trust me, it shows. Counseling, genomics, health promotion with a passion for women's health across the life cycle. She uses microdosing in her practice along with preparation and ongoing integration and support. Julie is a passionate foodie and has authored 3 cookbooks focused on balanced meals and healthy, low glycemic desserts and snacks. She has a knack for creating meals that are eye-appealing, delicious, and healthy. And her 4th book, Sunflowers, Sapphires, and Seraphim, is her personal story of transformation, an opportunity to share and inspire hope for others faced with life's challenges. Please welcome Julie Freeman.
Thank you, Casey. It's great to be here.
So happy to have you. Especially right now, it feels like, you know, at the time we're recording this, we just had a US election here in the United States, and 2025 is going to be sea change in so many ways. And one of the silver linings I see ahead is we are really starting to wake up to food as medicine, truly, and kind of really get back to the pivotal role nutrition has in our health and healing. So I wanted to open with just, you've been at this for so long. Like, why do you think nutrition and diet has been so neglected in our medical paradigm for so many decades?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. As we said, I've been a dietitian for, 40-ish years, which is so hard to believe. But I had a sense of that. I had a knowing back in my undergraduate studies, studying dietetics, that was not the be all and end all. And that actually the field of dietetics was much really more based in terms of disease management and hospital food, and not really, getting into natural holistic food. And hence this long winding journey of, graduate education and postgraduate certifications and whatnot. But I want to come back to something as industrialization took off, and that was around World War II when my folks were alive. It was Rosie the Riveter that kind of changed the projection of how women were going to be moving forward. And women's work became a very demeaning profession. Women now started entering the workforce. And so doing, food preparation and grocery shopping and all those things became like, oh, I'm more than that. And so I think that was a piece of it. But the other thing is that we also have fast foods. And I remember the first powdered potatoes and the first frozen meals. That became cool stuff. And so we really started to get away from fresh fruits and vegetables, and even knowing how to prepare them. I mean, I can't tell you how many of my clients have no clue about how to manage, a kitchen, never mind create a meal. So in my work, I will certainly work with people that want to do rolling up the sleeves and preparing their food, but I'll also work with assembly and finding the right foods that people can actually put together in a balanced way. So, but I see that as really a big start of when the change began to take place.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think so much of our culture is based on everything's toward efficiency,
Yes.
and saving time. And I think we're at the point where like, well, what are we saving time for? Let's center healing again. Let's center our diet and cooking together and sharing meals again. Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to dive into the things that we commonly see on our applications and intakes for people coming into microdosing work are, we see a range of things, but definitely far and away mental health are the things we see the most. So I would love for you to talk about kind of the nutritional complements of microdosing for certain things that we see commonly. Far and away, depression is tippy top. We see that particularly right now when we're in these kind of inflection points culturally and societally. It's triggering a lot of people, who have had past depressive episodes in the past, heading into the seasons, the winter seasonal affective disorders. So I'd love for you to share essentially some tips for kind of eating for depression.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny when you were asking me some of the things that we could, hit upon here today. When I think of SAD, it could be the standard American diet. It can also be the seasonal affective disorder. And it's funny, I remember always around the end of August, early September, having this feel of like, never knowing what it was. And it wasn't until my grad work in psychology, it was like, oh, there's a name for that. It's called seasonal affective disorder. So another one of my dear colleagues who you may have met along the way, Dr. James Greenblatt, he's a functional psychiatrist. So Jim and I have known each other since the late 70s, early 80s. And I remember as a young dietitian, he had a seminar on using fish oils for ADD and ADHD instead of medications. And of course, back then, the American Medical Association and the Psychiatric Association, oh my God, that's hogwash. That's absolutely crazy. But I said, you know what? There's something to this. And he stayed true to his course. And of course, now he's really world recognized for being a functional psychiatrist that does use food as medicine. And I really love that. So there's certain testing, there's certain labs that are really important to look at, in addition to just taking a really good history. And I always do a really good history with people. Vitamin D, and the ranges for vitamin D are between 30 and 100. But if somebody's between that 30 and 50, they still are usually subpar, and they may be experiencing, challenges with it. The other thing is that if vitamin D is not tested, and I just went through this with my own primary care doc, I'm Medicare now, I'm 67. Where do those years go? But he said, oh, the vitamin D is not covered, so I didn't order it. And I'm thinking, I want it, but I luckily I'm a practitioner and I have an NPI number and I can order my own labs, but this is the state of medicine. It's like, well, if we can't get it covered by insurance and we can't stay within our guardrails, and we're going to get docked extra money because we ordered the test, then we're not going to do it. And so it's really not about healthcare. It's about disease management and keeping us well enough, but also sick enough to stay in the system. So, I mean, we could have a whole discussion on big pharma, big grocery chains, big whatevers, fast food chains. But that's a little bit of a digression. So vitamin D, most definitely. I also really like to look at the B vitamins, and I prefer to look at it from a red blood cell count. So it would be red blood cell B12, red blood cell folic acid, and I'll usually request physicians to do that, or I will order it myself for the patient. Many people have what we call methylation defects. And about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, MTHFR, which was the methylation defect, was kind of the hot topic. We don't hear about it as much anymore, but it definitely is an issue. Many of the supplements that are out there are not in their methylated form. And so a person can build it up. It might look on their labs like they've got way too much B12 or folic acid, which may not be the case. It might just be building up in the blood. because they're not absorbing it. But your B vitamins are super important for brain function, cognitive function, gut function. B12 is manufactured in the gut, but it plays such a huge role in our mental health and our emotional well-being and cognitive health as well. Fish oils. So, I think people are aware that, getting enough good quality fatty fish in the diet is a good thing. We have to watch out for contamination. We also have to look at how has this fish oil been processed, et cetera. But our good quality fats create the cell membrane. And the cell membrane is actually what allows information to be brought into the cells. So the proteins are, the signaling molecules, but those fatty acids around the cells allow that information to be brought into the cell. So we have to look at fish oils. So D, B vitamins, fish oil, magnesium, huge. So magnesium has been pretty much farmed out of the soil because we don't do enough rotational farming. And mag is a huge one when it comes to depression, mental health, energy, muscular function, cardiovascular function, et cetera. So those are some of the biggies when it comes to depression. Yeah.
Thank you. Beautiful. And I think your point is so important that we need to advocate for ourselves so often and ask for these things, right? I just totally had that experience where I had to ask for vitamin D check on recent labs because you wouldn't think of it. Those of you who know me know I'm out every morning raise. I am at the beach often. I get a lot of sun and still it was 31. I just intuitively knew to check it and it was 31, barely passable. So, yeah. And true, especially for all the women listening, as you get closer to perimenopause and menopause, we tend to really need extra supplementation. So I love that you pointed that one out specifically. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. How about another one I'm seeing more frequently, not surprisingly, given current events, is anxiety.
Yeah.
How about eating and drinking for anxiety?
Yeah, most definitely. So again, anxiety and depression, we're still looking at it really focusing on those foods and potential supplements that might support us in that respect. But with anxiety, we also have to look at glutamate. And so glutamate, which is quite interesting because it's a fascinating chemical. It's one of the chemicals that affects our GABA center in the brain. But a person that has elevated glutamate levels oftentimes is very bright and very out of the box thinking. They're very creative, et cetera, and they're always on the move. However, and I know because I happen to be one of those people that can tend to get high glutamate levels. But glutamate can also be very inflammatory. It's because you're just burning through. Okay. There are so many foods that have glutamate in them, monosodium glutamate, and all of its other disguised names. So MSG is definitely one of them. Aged cheeses, and how many people love cheese. I oftentimes recommend cheese as an accent food, and I also try to go with healthier versions of cheese. And I also really look for people that might have more of an addictive tendency and try to get them off the cheese because of the opiates and things like that. But aged cheeses in particular have glutamate. Soy sauce, so soy sauce is another one, and we use that very regularly as a condiment. So those are things that we have to look at in terms of maybe taking them out of the diet in order to help reduce anxiety. Increasing magnesium again is such an important one. I frequently am using magnesium glycinate in the glycine form because glycine helps as a calming amino acid. So that's an important one. Balanced eating, and also giving yourself about that 13 hours off from dinner until breakfast the next day. So that means changing some habits, maybe not kicking up your feet and having, your late night snack with a cup of tea. I gave mine up long ago. It was hard to do, but now I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. But giving yourself that downtime so that the brain and the body can go through its detoxification allows you to have an adequate amount of serotonin earlier in the day so that you can feel more calm and chill.
Amazing. Thank you. Another thing that I've been seeing a lot, it's interesting. I saw it a lot around the pandemic, and I'm starting to see it again now, is old stuff coming back up. Old childhood traumas coming back forward, old eating disorders. People are like, I dealt with this in my 20s. Now I'm 57. Like, why is this coming back again and triggering old things? And at the same time, old things are being triggered, autoimmune conditions are flaring up. And it's not a coincidence, right? They're all wound together in our cellular memory. So I would love, this is a huge one for people and something that I hear people desperately coming to microdosing. Can microdosing help me with lupus or fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue and a lot of these autoimmune conditions? So I think eating an anti-inflammatory diet is so important, especially if you're working with some of those things and those old triggers coming up. So could you speak to some tips on that front?
Yeah. So the ACEs, the adverse childhood events, they actually blunt the development of the brain in terms of being able to manage and withstand and have the resiliency to, manage life stresses that are going to come and go, ebb and flow throughout all of our lives. And the vagus nerve, which there's been so much information about the vagus nerve and retraining it and doing bear crawls and gargling and all those, all those kinds of things that can help us with vagus nerve, EMDR, et cetera. Those can be helpful. But we have a bidirectional communication between the gut and the brain. We have more serotonin in the gut than we do in the brain. And if our gut is, not functioning properly, and we have dysbiosis, or we have bad bugs that are growing for a wide variety of reasons, then we will tend to have, more of these challenges anyway, ongoing, and they can be re-triggered. The other thing is that as women tend to go through perimenopause and menopause, a lot of times these things are resurrected to them. And part of that is it's the stage of life when we are reevaluating our life purpose. What am I doing? Am I on the path? And I know that's actually part of what I also wrote in my first book was, just kind of looking at a process of transformation and moving through. But that can certainly play a role as well. And then as women start to go through hormonal changes and estrogen declines, so doesn't serotonin. And so we can be feeling a little bit more of that, not so well and just not so on top of our game. Our body starts to change. We have maybe less muscle mass. We have to work harder at it, which means that we may be gaining some body fat. So there's a lot of physical, emotional kinds of things that can re-trigger old eating disorders, most definitely. With regard to autoimmunity, interesting. And I'm going to start with the emotional spiritual aspect because I'm going to digress a little bit about my own personal experience with it. But autoimmunity is basically fighting against your own body. It's like beating up your own body, without really wanting to or intending to. So if you came into the world and you were in a family and maybe a dysfunctional family, which probably 99.99% of us have been there, then you may have gotten early childhood messages of, I'm not worthy. I don't love myself. In fact, maybe I really have self-loathing. I don't know where my place is in the world. I don't know how to function moving forward. And so that self-loathing can also be a part of the emotional, spiritual lesson that we need to learn in terms of why is my body all of a sudden not functioning and having these autoimmune illnesses. So that's one piece of it that I see. The other part of it is all the exposure. So, we are exposed to over-sanitization. Let's sanitize everything. And of course, most of the chemicals that are used, even hand sanitizer, they're the most awful toxic things. And they have perfumes and all kinds of things in there that are actually probably more cancer causing than, maybe had we had a little bit of that germ. And I remember as a young child growing up, I had every atopic, thing, impetigo, ringworm, allergies, whatever, tons of strep throats. I was on antibiotics constantly as a kid. But I remember our family doctor, the one that used to come to the house with the black bag, he said to my mom, he goes, Dot, if you just let her get dirty, she would build up a tolerance. And I didn't. I also had very early exposures, as many did, to pesticides and chemicals that are now banned. My mother was on a now banned fertility chemical. My dad had all the banned pesticides, the DDT, the chlordane, the whatever. he would, pour Pine Sol in the basement of the house, and they were both smokers. I went on to develop hairy cell leukemia, which is less than 2% of the leukemia population. Not a lot known about it. But I said, you know what? I want to do the deep dive for myself because this is what I want to share with other people. And what I learned was from the emotional, spiritual level, spot on. I was not somebody that liked myself. I had to really do a whole lot of deep diving and deep work into not only accepting myself, but then developing self-love. The second thing is that when you look at hairy cell, the white blood cells are immature. They're just basically baby cells with lots of hair-like projections, almost like lanugo that would be on a newborn infant. Is that infant going to survive or not survive? And so there was that whole survival piece that was tied into it as well. And then big one, and in fact, there've been many, many claims against Monsanto for this. The exposures to, again, the chlordines, the DDTs, the Monsanto, the pesticides, Roundup, et cetera, et cetera. So just an interesting thing in terms of, and I do have autoimmune conditions. So interesting how these kinds of things, the over-sanitization, the environmental exposures, and then you pile on top of that the self-loathing, and then bam, you're a perfect candidate for an autoimmune illness.
Thank you so much. That's going to resonate with so many people listening. We see you. Yes. Yes. And I see that coming up in the healing journey too, because it's a lot. So a lot of it's just giving people a break and a lot of grace and self-compassion because you're overcoming so much, right? It's a long, many, many decades for a lot of people to come back from that. So give yourself the grace and time. And also one of the things, edges I see for people in their healing journey, especially people who suffer from autoimmune, is sometimes they'll start microdosing and they'll have healing that they have worked so hard to have for so many decades, and it can happen so quickly for some people. It's almost hard for them to receive because they're so wired for perfectionism, like you said, to work hard, not a lot of self-compassion and self-love, very giving to others, but very hard for them to receive themselves. And so that's frequently an edge for people to be able to to really open their arms and their heart to the healing that's available to them in that journey. So thank you. Thank you. So much richness to that. And like I said, I know people are going to resonate immensely with that.
I want to add two other things.
Please.
Yes. So the first one is when you talk about the whole receiving, there's an exercise that I frequently do. I oftentimes start my sessions with people by doing a little bit of a grounding and centering. So I'm just going to ask the audience to just go with me on this one. And I want you to consider this visualization that was offered to me throughout my many years of doing channeling and energy work with various people. But if you just take a few moments and just, close your eyes and sit very comfortably in your chair, bring your feet in touch with the earth and feel that grounding and that centering here. Take a nice deep breath in. Just sink into your seat. Bring your shoulders back and down so that your chest can receive that oxygen and that energy. And then I'd like you to take your left hand and place your left hand on your heart and your right hand out. And as you breathe in, I want you to visualize a beautiful white light that is coming down into your crown chakra and emanating all the way down through your body, bringing warm light, protective light. And as that light comes to your heart, feel that warmth and feel that white light just emanate out from you. Keep some of that white light within to energize, to build, to keep you safe and secure, as you also extend through your right hand some of that white light out to all that there is in this world, all beings, all animals, all plants, all people, all that we are connected to. Just take a moment and feel that. And as you're ready, just bring yourself back. So that is one that I love because, again, as part of that healing journey with autoimmunity, with cancer, with illness, with feeling less than and unworthy, many of us learned to give away all of our energy to the point where we were totally depleted. And we need to bring some of that back. That doesn't mean that we don't give out, but it does mean that we keep some of it for us. And when I think of some of the spiritual people that I follow, I was brought up Christian Catholic. I would call myself a little bit more of an open-minded spiritual, but the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the Buddha, you will oftentimes see that left hand on the heart and that right hand providing out for all. So I needed to share that one. And the other piece on autoimmunity is, again, I've been doing this for so long. When that low carb craze came out, probably 15, 20 years ago, I said, something's going to be wrong with that. And indeed there was, because the way that they made the breads low carb was to pump all this gluten in there, because gluten is a protein. So what's happened is we have had an exponential rise in not only non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is about 85% of the people that are sensitive to gluten, with also a rise in actual celiac disease. So again, that's an autoimmune disorder. It's just something that I think is really important. When we start getting into changing the nature of food too much, there's going to be a problem. Yeah.
Thank you. Love it. Love it. Love it. The exercise perfectly ties into my next question, which is around energetics and the role that food. One of the things that keeps coming through to me over the years in my own healing and for others is the importance of eating a living foods diet, like eating foods with a resonance and an energy and a life force to them, that because that contributes to our life force too. And so a lot of people in our community are highly, highly sensitive. And that's a beautiful trait, but it's also a bit of a liability in a very harsh, aggressive world, where I find sensitive people more energetically very permeable and more empathic and likely to take on other people's diseases and dissonance in their energy. So in terms of our diet for kind of strengthening our aura and strengthening our energetic resonance, do you have any tips and guidance around that?
Yeah, it's as simple as eat real food, and it's as hard as eat real food. And again, you have to kind of meet people where they're at along the spectrum. What I might do for me might not work for somebody else. And I need to honor that and help to move them as close as possible to what's going to be balanced eating for them. But real foods, real whole foods, taking the whole plant, the whole broccoli, and consuming it is going to give you a lot more nutritional value than just isolating the nutrient out of it and saying, okay, let me get my vitamin A from that, or let me get my sulforaphane from the broccoli, but get it in a capsule. I do use supplements in my practice. A lot of times we need to bring people to a place of balance, and then we kind of reevaluate. But absolutely, the way that foods are prepared makes a difference. So for example, with a lot of my osteopenia or osteoporosis women, they need more calcium, they need more iron, because oftentimes ferritin levels are low. Doctors don't look at iron when it comes to osteoporosis. They're only looking at calcium. So unfortunately, we need to look at the whole gestalt here. But your leafy greens are rich sources of both iron and calcium, but they're locked up in the plant. That's why they're not very absorbable in those two nutrients, but the way they're prepared. So if they're steamed and there's a little bit of an acid and an oil with your steamed spinach, a little bit of lemon juice, a little bit of olive oil, maybe throw a bit of garlic powder on there, perfect. You're going to absorb more of that calcium and iron. Same thing with kale, steam it, oven roast it, whatever, have a little bit of an acid and an oil, and then you're going to be able to absorb more of that nutrition. Protein, super important, huge topic, so that's another one, is that we need adequate protein for cell repair, cell building. Most of us are in the cell repair stage. I definitely am in the cell repair stage as opposed to the growth and anabolism. But that's important. And our proteins are also what are needed to make our neurotransmitters. to tell and direct the rest of the body what to do with regard to hormones. We also need our protein for making our thyroid hormone, which is the master, gland for us to be able to metabolize foods and conduct all of our other energy functions. So proteins are really important. And yes, definitely living foods.
Fantastic. You touched on this. I'd love you to dive a little farther in terms of supplements versus whole foods. Like, are there certain vitamins or things that are really hard to get enough of from whole foods that you oftentimes recommend to your clients that it's a really good idea to supplement for?
So I always do it. I generally do a look back at the last 2 years of labs, tests, office visits. If somebody's coming in from a medical therapy perspective, and then I will basically, look at that assessment and see where they are. Depending on where they are in terms of level, I may start right off with a supplement, or I may want to do some further testing. If someone is not really in a critical state, but their diet is really imbalanced, obviously I'm going to start first with the diet and say, all right, let's balance things out here. Let's get rid of those refined carbohydrates. That's probably one of the biggest areas of refined carbohydrates and sugars and things like that really, really mess up people's metabolism and increase the effects of cardiometabolic disorders and dysfunction. So those are that's the place that I would start. So I'd rather see someone be able to begin with balancing their diet. But if they are coming in with some critical lab values, then obviously I would start with a supplement with them right away.
Great. Okay, big topic. I'm super excited to dive into. Been seeing this a lot lately with these kind of triggers kicking up for people and seasonal affective disorder, cultural change happening. People are going to seek help and they're immediately being prescribed antidepressants. And when I talk to them, how is the interaction going? Their prescriber is not checking their thyroid. Their prescriber is not checking their hormones and seeing where they are in the menopause spectrum, is not checking their vitamin levels. Exactly. And so before people, to help them in their empowerment, people that are feeling off and off kilter and are stepping out and seeking help, which is courageous in and of itself, when they're going to a prescriber, we have to advocate for ourselves. We have to ask for certain labs and certain things to be checked because they're not being offered. What are some of the things that you recommend to people if people are feeling anxious or depressed to the sign that they need more support? What are the first things that you think people should advocate for themselves and ask their prescriber to check for before launching into a prescription?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Again, I would want to do a full nutrient panel, and I'd also want to look at a full thyroid function panel, which again, most physicians don't. So I usually outline for them. I'm not looking for just a TSH and a T4. I'm looking for, a T3 and a T4 ratio. And, for the people out there that don't know what those are, so your T3 is basically your active component of your thyroid hormone. And that's not looked at. And we need to look at the ratio of T3 to T4 to make sure that they're sort of like aligned with one another. And then if I feel like there may be autoimmune challenges, I would want to look at thyroid peroxidase antibodies or TPOs. I might want to look at antithyroglobulin, which is TGAB. And again, I usually will put in my note to the physician, dear Dr. So-and-so, if you agree, I would like to test these particular labs for these reasons. And then if they don't, and the patient says, that's okay, I'll have you order them, I will go ahead and order them for them. So thyroid panel, most definitely. If it's a woman with any history of any kind of hormonal disorders. So I started out with hormonal disorders from the age of 9. That was pretty much my whole life was some kind of hormonal disorder. I'd want to get a full female hormone panel. Or, even for a male, if the male's coming in with male pattern baldness and, the expanding belly, then I'm going to want to look at his testosterone as well as his estrogen, to see what's going on here. Vitamin D, most definitely. And then again, those 3 markers for B vitamins, red blood cell B12, red blood cell folic acid. I oftentimes will also add in an MMA, which is called methylmalonic acid. And that's an organic acid that will give us some better information about B12. Is that B12 being able to be digested and absorbed by the body? So sometimes I will ask for both of those. I may look at CRP. I mean, I oftentimes will ask for CRP, which is cardioreactive protein. That's a measure of inflammation. Homocysteine, because that will also look at all of your other B vitamins, your B6, your thiamine, and your niacin. B vitamins are so critical when it comes to mental health. So, that's a given right there. So those would be some of the big ones. And many of your SSRIs and your antipsychotics, I just had a new patient yesterday who's on a whole laundry list of stuff. I said, please ask your provider to test these things. But your antidepressants and antipsychotics will tend to deplete B vitamins, magnesium, vitamin D, calcium. Yeah, I think those are the big ones right there.
Thank you for touching on that. I'm also was taught that antidepressants can also deeply impact your gut health too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a big missing, frontier that you've been at this a long time, so you're well aware the importance of the gut, and the gut truly is a second brain that we have. And so most people aren't even aware. We're so focused, especially in microdosing and psychedelic world, on the impact on the brain and the serotonin receptors in the brain. Most people are learning for the first time how much of our gut is our emotion. The seat of our emotion is actually tied to our gut. So, can you talk about some of the antipsychotics and the antidepressants and how they impact the gut specifically?
Well, they definitely can disrupt insulin regulation. So there's a whole thing, especially antipsychotics in particular. They will tend to increase not only cortisol levels, but blood sugars. In fact, a client yesterday, her doctor put her on metformin because at least he was smart enough to test her blood sugars and her A1C. Medications, and the other thing with SSRIs is that it's a reuptake. So over time, you're going to have about that 10-year shelf life. It's kind of the same way with diabetes medications. After about 10 years, oral agents tend to not work any longer, and then you've either got to find a new class of meds or whatnot. So my understanding about SSRIs is that over time, they will deplete the serotonin receptors in the brain. So that's kind of bad news. And so for my clients that are sort of like on the fence and not really sure about this new wave of medicine, and I really refer to microdosing and some of the psychedelics as this will be the third tier of medical treatment. SSRIs were the second tier, and we had the first tier with the MAOs and all of that. But this is what is coming for the future in a wide variety of ways, whether you're growing it at home or whether you're going to be going and getting it from a prescriber. I do see that as being the third wave of medication. But these medicines do, again, deplete receptors. So if we're depleting receptors, most definitely we're going to have some more gut disorder and dysbiosis.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Alcohol. I wanted to dive into alcohol because this has just come up with two of my last clients, the conversation around this, because what ends up happening, I mean, we've supported hundreds and it's remarkable that so many people who don't even have the intention necessarily of giving up alcohol just find themselves, it's just effortlessly, they lose it from their lives. It's people who drink daily, go to drinking once in a while or special occasion. People who were special occasion drinkers just give it up altogether. And they don't have to try. They don't have to effort at all or will their way through it. And oftentimes they report the biggest friction and difficulty is it's so socially ingrained in our culture. Sure. They're like, it's awkward dating. It's awkward going to business dinners because there's still the stigma that something must be wrong for you not to drink, versus like, I really see this mass exodus move away from alcohol, where I think in the not too distant future, it's going to be more of an anomaly to be drinking alcohol than not.
Amen.
Right. And so over time, people become very curious, like, why does this happen and happen so quickly and readily? And to me, from what I've witnessed, I think it has a lot to do with, I specifically work with mushrooms, and mushrooms are very adept at releasing density and heaviness from the body on all levels, physically, mentally, emotionally, etherically, spiritually, and making your resonance lighter and brighter and more uplifted very naturally, so that your resting point is kind of a new higher resonance, so that when you're putting heavy foods and dense foods and alcohol into your system, your body's like, nope. You're much more sensitive to it, and you can feel the heaviness. You can like feel the depressive tendency of alcohol. So it just becomes something that it doesn't make you feel good. You're more aware how it impacts you. But I would love for you to speak from a physical perspective and nutrition perspective, the effect alcohol actually has on the body. And so people can really understand, like, what is it that you're doing to your body when you continue to drink alcohol daily? And what are some of the advantages of letting it go or reducing your intake?
Yeah, yeah. And it's, it is a touchy topic. And I always have to infuse humor, especially with my perimenopausal women, because that's the first thing they want to go for. Wine and women over 40 don't mix, unfortunately. Sorry to be, the bearer of bad news, but we try to lighten up the air a little bit on that. The alcohol of today is not biodynamic. It is nothing like what our ancestors had. And actually, if you think about even the history of alcohol, it was used actually for surgery or numbing something or whatever. It wasn't necessarily always used in the context of, getting inebriated, although certainly that's always been a piece of it as well. It's a different alcohol today. So that's one thing right off the bat. It's a toxin. There is nothing redeeming from alcohol at all. It is a poison to the body. And I think the biggest impact is that our livers are so overloaded from not only the SAD diet, standard American diet, but we also have to look at the way food's been processed and packaged. Things are packaged in plastic. There are environmental chemicals that we're breathing in, that we're drinking through our water. We're exposed to xenoestrogens in the nice emollient creams that we put on our faces and our bodies. And all of those things enter into the body and then have to be detoxified through the liver. So our poor livers are so overloaded that even if 20 years ago, an ounce of wine wasn't a problem, it may very well be now, because we're exposed to so many chemicals. So I see that as probably being the biggest area.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk about why, as people age, it becomes more impactful? Like, I've heard so many women say, like, I used to be able to drink, I just can't process and metabolize alcohol like I used to. Why is that? Why does that happen?
So a lot of it has to do with our estrogen decline. And, there's this whole big movement now for, looking for a gynecologist who is more, advanced in terms of training for menopause, not just OB. And again, I have those conversations every day with my female clients, and I have a handful of physicians that I refer to for any advanced testing. But estrogen is detoxifying in and of itself. So estrogen helps our serotonin. It helps our gut to stay more balanced, so that we're not developing dysbiosis. And so, as our estrogen declines, we're more prone to things like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, candida, yeast overgrowth, and things of that nature. Motility slows down. And as motility slows down, our toxins aren't moved through and processed as quickly as they were in the past. So there's a number of different things that are happening. But for women in particular, a lot of that has to do with the estrogen decline.
That's fascinating. That's super important. Can you, if people are hearing the term dysbiosis for the first time, can you define what dysbiosis means?
So dys means out of balance.
Okay.
And so biosis would be the biota or the flora that inhabit our gut. And we have good guys and bad guys. Mm-hmm. We need to have a balance of both of them. And the problem in our society, because of medications that people are on, especially like proton pump inhibitors, and some of those other medications, there's an increase in that, dysbiosis.
Yes. And hence the need for prebiotics and probiotics, right?
Okay. Absolutely.
Yep. Yep. So all of you out there who were on antibiotics as a kid, right? Which is a lot of us. Yes. So repairing your gut that way too. Beautiful. I'd love to touch on, before we depart from alcohol, one of the things I think is so problematic is that thanks to the 50s and the 60s, like that era of psychedelics, you know, defining all psychedelics, including plant medicines and earth medicines, as a drug, right? As a drug and an intoxicant, when it's actually very far from the reality of it's the opposite mechanism. And so people a lot of times, especially beginners, we'll have some beginners listening to this who are just checking microdosing out. So a lot of times beginners, because of the misinformation and the stigma out there, they tend to think they're going to respond to microdosing, plant and earth medicines like they do alcohol. They're going to feel inebriated, or they're going to feel more out of it or off their game or slowed down, when the reality is actually the opposite. Like mushrooms tend to make you better in every way. Sharper, clearer, more dialed in, more focused, more articulate. So when you're working with people, you and I both, I think, probably work with a lot of people who live through that stigma, the Reagan era and before. So how do you see it meaningfully, like people opening their mind and shifting out of that mindset that this is a drug that's going to do something to me?
Yeah, especially with mushrooms, because mushrooms are basically a food. It is a plant-based medicine. Medicine can be used in such a wide variety of terms, but I think that we oftentimes think of it as a pharmaceutical. So re-educating people to the fact that this is a plant, and then also educating them to the fact that this has been used indigenously in cultures for thousands of years as their main medicine before pharmaceuticals, with that, positive impact. The other thing is the education about a microdose is that it's almost an imperceptible feeling of just a little bit of an elevation.
Mm-hmm.
So very different than a density or a hammer hit. There are times that we need the hammer hit, which is maybe the pharmaceutical, but before we get there, we should try some of these other approaches.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Yeah, I see us in the coming months and years speaking to larger and larger audiences as this really does move into as you said, the third wave and becomes more mainstreamed. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask about, scientific research on the brain and on our minds, but the gut is really to me, it opens up this whole new frontier of understanding. So I would just love, you're so close to the field and have been for so many years. I would love to see where you think it's going in terms of gut health and the gut's role in our health and our healing, but just also some other trends and things, the nutrition field in particular. I just remember we went through phases where everybody was eating like pork rinds. Just pork. And I was just like, this can't be good. Let's hope this doesn't stick around, the Atkins craze and this and that. And so I would love for you to weigh in on kind of the future as you see it of the nutrition field.
Well, a number of my pioneer colleagues, Jeff Bland happens to be one of them. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to get to meet Jeff, but he's just a brilliant, brilliant man. He has actually really kind of re-resurrected some of the ancient foods. One of them is Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, which also happens to be a high protein grain. And, this whole idea of, again, food as medicine is getting more connected to the plants of the earth, and maybe even having your own garden in your home, or even, I also love the hydroponic movement, where people are actually growing the foods in their water, but have these beautiful plants that are actually a part of their home environment. So I think, again, that connection to the actual food and the preparation of it. And that has so much to do with our digestion, because digestion begins with the thought of food. I'm getting a little hungry. I'm thinking about food. Now I'm preparing my food. So there's a visual sense to that food. That food should be beautiful. It should have color. It should be pleasantly placed on your plate, because that we see and we eat with our eyes first. As that happens, our salivary amylases are starting to be, those juices in the mouth are starting to get ready. And the parietal cells of the gut are starting to secrete some hydrochloric acid to prepare for digesting our proteins and tenderizing our fibers. And then we actually have the act of eating, which would be a pleasantly set table with maybe a centerpiece and you've got your beautiful flowers behind you, but have that at the table with you while you're eating. And that you have that ambiance. And I oftentimes joke is that when I was in undergraduate school, that was one of the pieces. My nutrition program was part of the home economics division. And so we had to not only prepare the food, but we had to do the table settings, and we had to make our own floral centerpieces and all these wonderful things. And that is part of preparing for digestion. It's taking that time to do that. We call it mindful eating. But that's what mindful eating basically is. And then also offering up gratitude, whether that might be grace or whether that's just, taking a nice deep breath and thanking the food for being there for you.
I love that. That's so, so beautiful. And it reminds me too, it's taking the time. It's a self-care practice too, and a self-love practice to take that time and do that for yourself, because so many people, like, that's the last thing. They're like driving and eating protein bars, because they're serving everybody else in their family's needs. Like, how many of you guys do that where, it's just packaged food that you have in the car with you? And yeah, to take the time to actually prepare a beautiful meal and have intention. I know when I think about the most memorable, beautiful meals I've ever had, they were that, the food was great, but it was everything around it. It was the company, it was the intention, it was the love that was made, and it was the love with which was consumed over. So yeah, thank you for bringing that in. That's really beautiful. In terms of the psychedelic field, when you're speaking to your clients now, are there any themes or trends or currents you see that people are coming to microdosing practice or mushroom practice or psychedelic practice that's top of mind right now that you've been seeing a lot of?
Yeah, I would say that it's mostly are the women that are experiencing hormonal changes and challenges. And again, what accompanies also those hormonal changes and challenges are that time in life when the kids are leaving the home, and job changes may be, occurring, relationship changes may be changing. So that tends to be more of the audience that I'm seeing in terms of interest and a little bit more curiosity and openness.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. And how can people, if people are listening and drawn to learn more about your work, potentially work with you, how can people find you? Can you share a little bit about your practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have two practices. I have been a licensed and registered dietitian, like I said, for about 40-ish plus years. So I still have a solo practice. People can reach me at julie@freeman.net. So that's easy enough. And then I also have a beautiful comprehensive program with a partner, Denise, called Intrinsic Wholeness. And that incorporates coaching and some of the high touch testing that we can do, in terms of the functional lab testing and whatnot. And I can still do functional labs in my private practice. But that's a whole basically online spa experience. And so we have the high ticket option, and we have the more, mainstream type functional integrative medicine approach.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's the future. I hear people say that obstacle so many times is they can't get into a doctor, they can't get in the conventional ways. But I feel like in the future, people are going to be able to do so much more themselves with the right support, with a health coach, with a nutritionist, and being able to understand their labs and become empowered that way, that you don't have to get these things. You don't have to go through a doctor necessarily.
No.
Yeah.
And I do like to partner with conventional docs, because we still have a majority of people that are tethered to some degree to their health insurance, although there's some great products that are coming out there. I love being able to work with conventional docs and help to educate and enroll them into the process. And then we get to work as a team.
Yep.
So in some ways, I'm always the person that likes to be the bridge. I like to say, okay, how can we get both sides to work together rather than say, oh, you're wrong and you're right, and let's throw that one out the window. But then for people who totally want to just say, I'm going to take this responsibility on my own and do a fee for service, pay out of pocket, high touch type option, that's also available as well. So I do feel grateful for my functional medicine training, because that has allowed me to be able to be in that scope of more primary care, lens looking at things.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. So much. So we just so all of you know, listening, we barely scratched the surface of Julie's depth of knowledge and expertise. So yeah, if you feel like nutrition support, you could use that. Yeah, don't hesitate to get in touch with her at her practices. So Jewel, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really appreciate. Anything else you want to share, where to find you, or parting thoughts?
Oh, parting thoughts. So we've been through a major, I think, anxiety-provoking time. And I've posted a little bit, I get on there every once in a while, but I think what's most important is for all of us to recognize that we are all on the same path. We all want basically the same things. We want to be healthy. We want to be whole. We want to have our families be safe. And that it's important for us to be able to sit at the table with all kinds. I oftentimes have referred to a song I sang back many years ago called Table of Plenty. Where saints and sinners were friends. And that doesn't mean that it has to be religious, but it's basically that if we can all sit together and listen to each other and really be open, that together as a human family, we can move forward and heal.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you again so much. And thank you, everybody who is listening today. I appreciate each and every one of you. We will be back in a couple weeks with our next episode. Until then, have a really beautiful day ahead. Thanks, Joel.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Microdosing for Healing podcast. Are you ready to take the next step? Please visit us at microdosingforhealing.com to access our free Microdosing 101 workshop. In it, you'll learn more about our diverse community, our supportive group programs, and discover if earth medicine practice might be right for you. See you in the next episode.